Hi, everybody. Welcome back. And we're here with my very good friend, Tom. And we've been talking about Seattle and Montana and all the interesting places he's lived throughout his life. And next, I want to ask him about Mexico. Tom, you studied abroad in Mexico, right?
hmm
And how long did you live there? How long did you spend in Mexico?
I was there for 6 months, my sophomore year of college, first two quarters.
And and why did you choose Mexico? I assume you had many choices. There were many options for you to go, right?
Actually, not.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's kind of funny because I'll talk about it a little bit more when we talk about Brazil. But when I was living in Montana, my best friend for a couple years, I mean, he's still a good friend of mine, was a Brazilian exchange student. And uh, what happened was is that where I was living in Montana, there was a woman that really loved the idea of foreign exchange. She had hosted one exchange student, and then she convinced all these families to take on exchange students. And my family ended up being one, though the exchange student that we had was from Mexico. But close to the farm I lived on, there's a woman that not adopted, but hosted two exchange students, and one of them was from Santo Andre. Um, and then I also had another friend from the neighboring town who was an exchange student from Sao Paulo. And I got along really well with them. I ended up, when I was 17, coming here, staying in Santo Andre, but we've spent a lot of time in Sao Paulo. Just kind of fell in love with everything and wanted to learn Portuguese. But the university we went to didn't have Portuguese. So kind of my plan was, well, I'm going to learn Spanish so I can learn Portuguese later. And the Seattle University had a program Seattle University is a Jesuit university, and they had a exchange program with another Jesuit university in Puebla, Mexico. I didn't really want to go to Mexico actually at first because I felt it was too close to home. And I hate to admit it, but you kind of have these kind of stereotypical ideas of Mexico sometimes growing up in the U.S. And I didn't really think it would be that interesting of a place, which turned out to be completely wrong. Of all the places I've been to, and this is not to put down the other places, but I just think in terms of the culture and the history, Mexico is actually the most fascinating place I've been to. And it just has such a rich history and such a rich culture. Mexico used to be a bunch of different indigenous nations, and that diversity is still reflected in how it is today, along with a lot of different European and even African influences. There's just no other place like it. But that was the reason why I ended up going there, was because the university had an exchange program there. And it was easier to get all the credits, and it kind of was just easier to set everything up. And I think it was going to be cheaper too and everything. The SU tuition actually partially covered the study abroad and everything. So there were still other expenses that we had to pay, but it was going to be easier for my family and everything for me to do that. And the goal was just to learn Spanish. So I needed to go someplace where they spoke Spanish.
Okay.
And so that's what we ended up doing.
Cool. And you said that you traveled to Brazil a couple years before, but this study abroad to Mexico, was it your first extensive stay outside the United States?
Yeah. I mean, when I came to Brazil, I stayed here for 5 weeks. But it was the first time I'd really kind of lived and did something in another country.
And
So
how was that? How was the transition? How was adapting to a new culture? How was it the first time that you did it? Because after it, you lived in Korea for some time, and now you've lived in Brazil for several years. How was the very
yeah.
first time that you had to make that adaptation?
It was probably a little bit easier because I went with a bunch of friends from school, which was an advantage and a disadvantage, because if you really wanted to, you didn't have to engage with the local culture. And then Puebla, when we got there, I found out kind of has a reputation for the rest of Mexico of having people who kind of have a tendency more to stay within the same group of friends that they've had since they were childhood. They can be kind of cliquish, I guess they say in Puebla. but we still, got to know a lot of people. We had Mexican friends. We also made friends with the other exchange students, and a lot of times we had to speak Spanish between them, although most of them also spoke English. I ended up having a group of Brazilian friends when I was there too, who were from Recife. So kind of everywhere I go, I seem to kind of run into Brazilians. But at the same time, it was. I mean, I don't know. It's been so many years now, too, man. I mean, it's hard to believe this, but it's been like 15 or more years since I went there. But I think the hardest thing actually for us was the food, really, because I like Mexican food and the food in Puebla is good, but it was just like having that every day. We got like I kind of I didn't realize how much I was going to miss the food I was used to. And then we had some problems with our first host family too. Like they kind of pocketed the money that we gave them that was supposed to cover some of our expenses and didn't give us food and stuff. So we kind of ended up kind of starving the first like couple of months. And that probably didn't help. And we had a hard time communicating like the problems that we had because we didn't speak any Spanish and stuff. My roommate did. He spoke fluent Spanish already, but even so, it was like we were trying not to offend anybody. We were trying to be open and everything. The second host family that we had was wonderful. So it's not like they were representative of Mexican or Pueblan families in general. It just kind of happened to be the way that things worked out. But that, and then I think, it's funny because being American, I get this other places, but in Puebla specifically, not necessarily the rest of Mexico, but you kind of get this thing where people either loved you because you were American, like, oh, because all the TV shows, movies they watch and everything. And kind of a lot of middle and upper class people, like that's their, like what they want. They want to be American. They want to go to the US and everything. Or else people hated you because like there's kind of a complicated history between the US and Mexico, right? And that was during the Iraq War, which was not very popular in Mexico too and stuff. It would kind of be like you go to a party and they'd be like, oh, American, we love you. Or it'd be like, get the fuck out of my face. Like, sorry. But, like, get out of my face, you gringo bastard, So that was kind of interesting. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, though, I think it was more like being basically kids and like being away from home for a long time, I think was more of the difficulty than it was. I mean, even though I didn't live at home anymore, I was living far away from my family still with the place I was used to, with the culture I was used to. I think it was more just kind of feeling out of place than it was differences with the culture. But one of the things that helped was one of my friends that I went with, her father was from a suburb of Mexico City, which was not very far from where we're living. Puebla is about a 2-hour drive south of Mexico City. And so we would spend a lot of time there, and the family was just like so great. They basically like adopted us, like when my parents came to visit, they insisted that they stay with them. And they would take us around to different places. We'd go around the city with them, and just this really wonderful, welcoming family. And that was cool because we kind of got an experience of what Mexican family life was like that, and at least, for them. And, very tight knit family, very affectionate, like in that case, we got lots of food, lots of good food and stuff. And that was really cool. I think that was one of the best parts. I'm still in touch with them, not that much. I haven't been back since I studied there, though I'd love to. I'd love to take my wife there because, like I said, Mexico is just such a fascinating place, and the people are great. My parents, who were kind of country bumpkins, they even loved it. I mean, my parents, who hate big cities, they loved Mexico City. And people were just very helpful and welcoming. I mean, even within Mexico City has this kind of reputation of being this like dangerous big place. But when we were there, like, we had to take the bus back to the suburb to stay with the family we were with. And like, it was kind of like hard trying to figure out which street to stop by and everything, because it's kind of like Santo Andre, where the streets kind of go in weird directions and like a lot of the neighborhoods look the same and stuff. And I knew how to get there, but like there would always be people on the bus like, oh, do you know where you are? Do you know where you're going? Like, can we help you? And like not like trying to get anything from us, So I found Mexicans people to be generally very open and welcoming and just all around decent, cool people, and very like another thing like to totally like undid like all the stereotypes that you kind of grew up with in the United States about Mexico is Mexico actually like per cap in general has the people who work the longest, some of the longest hours in the world actually. People in Mexico work a lot, and for not very good pay, but my first host mom was kind of a semi-retired teacher, but she was still working all the time and everything. So life in Mexico it's not necessarily that easy for a lot of people. People have to work a lot to get by, but they still like and it's interesting because going back to the indigenous times, there's this kind of almost fatalistic outlook, where like life ends in death, and there's this very conscious kind of, the culture has a very conscious idea of death, but I think maybe partially for that reason, like they want to enjoy life, like people really I think know how to enjoy life, and like they take all the Catholic saint days pretty serious, and so like there's lots of parties. There were always fireworks going off where I lived and everything like that, and just a really rich culture because it was this really interesting marriage between European and indigenous culture. And next to Puebla is a town called Cholula, which has the largest pyramid in the world. Yeah, a lot of people don't know this, but they have the largest pyramid in the world. It's bigger than the pyramids at Giza, but it's buried because what happened was when the Catholic missionaries came and the Spanish conquistadors, they decided like, well, we're not going to tear this thing down. So they buried it and built a church on top of it.
Yeah. This is very Catholic.
Yeah, but and they haven't completely unburied this pyramid yet. But you can go inside of it. We went through this one chamber and everything one time. But me and my friend, we used to catch the bus and go to have a drink and sit like in the they have every Mexican city has what they call the Zócalo, which is the historic center, and it's usually still preserved with all the colonial buildings and everything. And so we'd go sit there and like in front of a colonial architecture bar with the pyramid in view, and just be there drinking our nobody drinks Corona in this part of Mexico. That's for the tourists. We drink our Sols, and they have a Sol. The company that makes Sol has this other beer that's really good. It's called Indio, and then enjoy the view of the pyramid. And we did a lot of traveling. Part of the program that I did at the end of the school courses, we did this kind of tour of southern Mexico. And there are pyramids everywhere in Mexico. Like you go down the highway and there's pyramids on the side of the street. It's a lot of things that a lot of people don't know, but there's a huge there's all these archaeological sites everywhere. I mean, one of the things I love about Mexico City, like Mexico City is my favorite city, I think, of all the places I've been. The only reason why I wouldn't want to live there is because of the pollution. But like the Zócalo in Mexico, like you have this huge Catholic cathedral, like kind of, it's not really technically Gothic, but very Gothic-like. And then right next to it is the pyramid, one of the pyramids for what was the capital of the Aztec Empire. And they're like, excavating it still right there in the middle of the city. So like, there's no place in the world like that. I mean, imagine like you're in the biggest, like one of the biggest cities in the world, and you're sitting next to this archaeological, excavation while you're eating your enchiladas.
Very cool. Before we move on to the next place, can you like quickly try to tell me, is there something from your experience in Mexico that you've held on to that's changed, maybe a habit in your daily life or a part of who you are, or something about you that you've kept all these years later?
Let me think here for a second. Well, like I said, I had a lot of preconceived notions. So I think one of it is like, never think that you know something about a place until you've really been there, I think is And also, you know, having studied and worked and studied there and lived for a long time, that you can't really, I mean, I don't know how much you can ever really get to know a place, but you can't really get a good grasp on what a place is about unless you spend an extended amount of time there. And that's, I think, the reason why I ended up doing Korea the way I did, why I kind of, I looked for a place where I could work outside the country, because I wanted to have that type of experience again. And that's kind of, I mean, like when I travel, I haven't really, I mean, also for economic reasons, I haven't really gotten to travel as a tourist to many places. But generally, the way I try to do it is to go to one or two few places and spend a decent amount of time there. I don't like doing the type of tourism where you're like, okay, let's go to this spot, and let's go to this spot, and let's go to this spot. Because you just get a real superficial feel for it like that, where you're trying to just go to all the different towns that have tourist spots. And also, you know, trying to get to know locals, I think is also another thing. Like, you know, um, it didn't really work out for me in Korea so much that way. To a certain extent it did, but instead of like trying to hang out with other tourists and stuff, usually what I try to, although I have met a lot of really cool travelers in hostels and stuff, but I also try, you know, to get to know some local people, or I try to go places where I have a connection with local people. Because, and I think that was all kind of due somewhat to my to experience here, my first experience here in Brazil, but even more so my experience in Mexico. You know, I don't think we would have had the same experience that we did. And I say we because I spent a lot of time with my friend Jared, who was my roommate there, who was another really good friend of mine from Seattle University. But I don't think we would have had the same experience if we wouldn't have had that friend of ours who had family in Mexico that we spent time with. So
Cool.
yeah, I think it's that those things definitely.
Nice.